The international system is facing accelerated transitions as competition between the great powers intensifies. Join this important dialogue with the Kingston Consortium on International Security.
All right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It looks like everyone is seated, and we'll go ahead and get started with the second day of the Kingston Consortium on International Security. Thanks again for joining us this morning. My name is Lieutenant Colonel Tyler Donnell, and I'm the U.S. Army War College Visiting Defense Fellow to the Center for International and Defense Policy. It looks like everyone is appropriately caffeinated and ready to go. I'll just rehash some of the admin notes from yesterday. Again, in case of emergency, please use the 2 exit doors and we'll muster in the parking lot. Please silence all electronic devices. All of these sessions are recorded and will be available online following the conference. We will take regular health breaks, but if you need to exit the room at any time, please do so. And then Mike does remain available for French translations as needed and potentially between American and Canadian. We're honored to introduce the moderator for this morning's keynote speaker, Brigadier-General retired Brian McPherson.
Good morning, folks. Let me get to the mic, Howard. My voice is not loud enough. Before I start here this morning with the introduction of our keynote speaker, I'd just like to give a big shout out to the organizers of this event. I've been involved in KCIS since 2010 when I was Chief of Staff of LFDTS, and there's some familiar faces here in the organization crew, and it's quite impressive but not surprising that KCIS remains after all this time as a very worthwhile event. So congratulations to you and the team, Howard. Okay. Folks, it's my distinct pleasure here to introduce our keynote speaker, Brigadier-General John Errington, the Strategic Joint Staff Director General Plans for the Canadian Forces. For those that have read his bio, and I encourage you to do that, you'll note that he's a very experienced officer, having commanded at all levels. He's got a lot of time overseas, has done a lot of domestic operations, and has done his time in National Defense Headquarters at the Level 0, as you can tell by his gray hair and the bags under his eyes. As DG plans for the CAF, he has his finger on the pulse. And I can think of no one better to deliver the keynote this morning than Brigadier General John. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome him on your behalf. General.
Good morning, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. I'm already going to change some of my notes because I was going to thank Brian for his kind introduction, but I'm not sure that was so kind. Gray hair, Level 0, out of touch, maybe, I don't know. Listen, thanks so much for the introduction. I'd like to thank the hosts for inviting me here to speak, mostly for getting me out of my office in Ottawa. And thank you all for putting up with my interjections yesterday and the questions I asked. I know I'm not always tolerable. It's great to be here again. I've been to cases before a couple of times, previous iterations, pre-pandemic. Before I share some thoughts and hopefully some thought-provoking considerations, I believe it's important to understand the viewpoint to which an issue is considered. So I'm going to try and paint that picture a little bit. Not going to obviously go through my own bio, but I will emphasize that I am a generalist, a practitioner and a student of the profession, previous links to the Canadian Forces College and to CADTC. In my current capacity as the CAF strategic planner, I've had the privilege to closely monitor not only what's happening in Ukraine, but conflicts around the world at the strategic level. So many of the issues that were discussed yesterday and will continue to be discussed today permeate through my head whether I want to or not. It continues to go in there. I wouldn't say it keeps me up at night, but certainly maybe puts the bags under my eyes and it's my daughters that put gray hair on my head. So the manner to which I'm going to do the presentation today and my observations of Russia's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine, I'm going to go from past, present to future. And how I chop that down a little bit, I'll offer considerations at the international level, the Canadian level, and then the Canadian Armed Forces. My goal at the end of this is at least 1 or 2 points that I bring up resonate with each and every one of you and provoke your own thoughts on the issue, and perhaps even the ultimate goal of one of the smart and ambitious people in the room to take some of the concepts that I present at the end and run with it to be useful for the future security environment. Because I do think that we are at a turning point, and there are some ways of doing things a lot better, even if the nature of war is perhaps unchanging. Lastly, a couple of points of what I will not cover. I don't have time to delve into specific domains and the changing nature of the battlefields. I believe the Chief of Defense Staff will cover some of that later on this afternoon. I will use some specific examples. I don't have time to get into every bit of the different domains. The examples that I'm going to use, you'll occasionally wonder why I'm picking that example. It's selfish. It sets up for my own key messages. Okay, so I'm doing that for my own purposes. Humor me a little bit and bear with me. You'll see where I'm going at the end. You'll also note the lack of discussion on Russia. I'm not one of those people. I didn't forget that the adversary and enemy gets a vote. I'll mention it a couple of times, but the threats above and below the threshold that we talked about are prevalent every day. I'll leave Russia's analysis to a higher level of classification and the intelligence analysts that do that. So that's kind of how I would frame the comments that I'm going to cover here this morning. Allow me to paint a bit of a picture of the recent past, circa 2014, up to and including about a year ago. So it does cover, in my past, for today, it does cover the launch and Russia's invasion into Ukraine. So globally, I'd start by saying that Western nations and NATO allies benefited from the peace dividend that the end of the Cold War afforded every one of us. During this period, many NATO nations, including Canada, curtailed defense budgets and military capacity to match the reductions in that threat profile. These cutbacks saw corresponding impacts on the level of defense capacity as military stocks and industrial production shrank. By all conventional metrics, the military capacity of NATO has been trending down to the invasion of Ukraine. Simply put, NATO was not nearly the priority nor getting the attention that it certainly does today. In the big picture, and certainly compared to where we are now, we were very slow in international reactions since Russia invaded Crimea in 2014, save for some significant reactions internal to Ukraine, particularly culturally. And I'll use an example from yesterday as we discussed women, peace, and security. Lieutenant Colonel Melanie Lake mentioned her time in Ukraine, noticing a whole of society mobilization based on the existential threat that they faced even back in 2014. Perhaps some important condition setting for where we are today and condition setting of some of the things I'm going to talk about later. If we take recent examples of major international intervention and conflict, areas such as Iraq, Afghanistan, or Haiti, the international community would deploy with significant numbers to basically take over the security situation. I would argue nominally with host nation security forces in support, but for the most part, we went in, took over, and created that vacuum. We'd stay for a decade or more, create a vacuum, and then see the collapse of the security situation as soon as we withdraw. Wasn't that long ago we watched that exact thing play out in the news and in the media with Afghanistan. We continually repeat this type of intervention, and it may not be the way that we should be intervening in the future. So Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine on 24 Feb 2022 saw the return of conventional warfighting to Europe. At the time, I was a commandant of CFC. I was walking around observing a JCSP exercise, and I reiterated to students that the direct challenge that was occurring on rules-based international order by Russia is the exact reason they were doing OPP exercises and preparing to be in a NATO headquarters. We were witnessing a scale of ground war that I did not ever expect to see in my time in uniform. This conflict has also witnessed the rise in the use of non-state actors and proxy forces to affect operations, being unbounded to the rule of law and the rule of armed conflict. Russia's use of private military contractors to prosecute combat operations is unique and dangerous development. Yet this conflict has also provided an unparalleled opportunity to assess Russia's military capabilities and the effectiveness of a range of modern technologies and weapon systems to use on the battlefield, most of which will be discussed in the next session later on this morning. So all that to say that from an international perspective, from a Canadian perspective, we were not immune to these reductions, perhaps even being complacent here in Canada. Military investment in 2022 totaled 1.22% of the GDP. We had difficulty, that's been in the news a lot, may have paid attention. We had difficulty and no imperative to keeping our military investments up with our key partners. There was nobody holding us accountable. COVID and domestic issues were the priority to the point of Russia's invasion right into Ukraine. At the outset, Canada stated its support to Ukraine and the condemnation to Russia immediately, but the agility to respond and to the support was at risk. We didn't have flexibility. We didn't have the conditions set to support an ally when they needed it most. Our defense spending, investment, and our production lines were not in a good position to help that ally in support. Unfortunately, this transition period represented and presented an opportunity for Russia to solidify its military gains in Ukraine. One could argue the war could have been over very, very quickly. From a CAF perspective, the impact on funding limits was very noticeable. Put frankly, we lacked the essential capability and support with battle-decisive capabilities. They were not there and didn't exist. We do not have air defense systems. We hadn't decided what would come of our aging tanks, and our own ammunition stocks were sufficient for peace, training, and readiness, but a brutal situation and lesson that all nations are learning from today. The industrial base that you have when a war starts is the one you're stuck with. In summary, on a positive note, the CAF does have a history of providing military support to Ukraine. Following the Russian invasion of Crimea in 2014, Canada launched Operation Unifier in response to the request from Ukraine to help deter Russian aggression and help Ukraine remain free, sovereign, secure, and stable at that time period. The focus of this operation was to help train the Ukrainian armed forces with NATO tactics, professionalization of the senior NCO Corps, and some professional military education. And yesterday's Women, Peace, and Security conversation were small examples of our linkages to the Ukrainian forces. In summary, the post-Cold War mentality that viewed Russia as little more than a waning regional power evaporated quickly. Perhaps here is a good reference to the conference theme as to how much has changed or not changed, but the bloody brutality of war and the goal of breaking an adversary's will perhaps is the character of war that remains unchanged today. But there are always multiple perspectives and perhaps ways that we can improve this. With China as a strategic partner to Russia and the competitor in the Indo-Pacific, we are entered into a new and more dangerous multipolar world. So as I start to fast forward in time and now seeking to secure those needed capabilities, we are seeking those needed capabilities such as air defense and posture the CAF for challenges of this emerging threat environment. Hopefully we learn those lessons. More specifically, this new environment is challenging NATO and Western nations to respond through the application of military mass. And you'll see this, I'll speak more to it, but as we move on the Eastern Front, going to brigade group deployments in places for the Canadian Armed Forces like Latvia. Moreover, the environment has exposed a vulnerability in how Canadian military and technology capabilities are integrated and must be rapidly closed. And this is what I'll refer to in the next panel in the data analysis and targeting and different technology advantages that we should be investing in immediately. This effort will take time and require expanded investments in emerging technologies and Canada's military industrial complex. So let's proceed to some important factors since the war began and where we are today. The first thing I'd like to point out is the will to fight. This cannot be overstated. If Ukrainians did not stand up and fight for their homeland, this would be very different presentation and conversation today. Their president was an entertainer turned politician, but the questions were asked to how could and would he be in a wartime as a wartime leader. A bit rhetorical now, and we'll find out, no doubt, his visit tomorrow and Saturday will be well attended and received here in Canada. My key message here is that the people and the government leaders of Ukraine, had they not mobilized a whole society against the existential threat, I believe the situation would be quite different. The next major factor I'd like to table is the international community response. I'll start with the Ukraine Defense Contact Group, UDCG. It's an alliance of now over 54 countries supporting the defense of Ukraine by sending military equipment of all sorts to include ammunition. And this is attended by defense ministers, SecDefs, CHODs, etc. 15 meetings have occurred so far, basically one per month, making pledges and donations to enable the ongoing fight. It's worthy to note that there are also other countries that are not public about their donations. They remain private for their own security and relationship reasons. So what? I want you to imagine you're part of the institution in Ukraine. You're part of that Ukrainian institution, whether you're in uniform or not, and you're fighting a war to exist. And now over 50 countries are calling to donate and coordinate training, equipment, ammunition, etc. That task would be unmanageable, let alone the training aspects that go along to support it. So think of what you know publicly about the donations and individual countries have made to Ukraine, and now multiply that by 50. I believe there are over 250 different types of fleets to train, maintain, and equip, let alone the spare parts that go along with that. But Ukraine's at war. They need the equipment, they need the support to survive, and they're not going to say no. Every time a nation goes to donate something, they're going to say yes. As soon as they say no, they no longer get the donations. This level of support would be enough to grind many planners, logisticians, and movers to a halt. Certainly, I know it would for me. In the interest of time and security, I'm not going to dive into the preliminary work of the 18th Airborne Corps, who use technology to ramp up battlefield awareness and informing much more effective decision-making. I will leave this aspect to subject matter experts this morning, but that headquarters certainly set the conditions for what is now known as the Security Assistance Group Ukraine, SAG-U, in Wiesbaden, Germany. If you want to learn more about SAG-U, I'll give a quick shout out to Rebecca Jensen, who was their academic advisor from January to July. Hit her up. She'd like to, no doubt, have conversations about it. But I'm going to speak a little bit about this organization because it sets up where I believe things could go in the future. This organization is basically an enabler with key lines of effort on training and equipping support to Ukraine, synchronizing and prioritizing this Herculean effort that I discussed. There are other aspects of the headquarters with traditional J-codes in Ops, Int, etc., who track and plan the battle with periodic war games at the highest levels, all assisting and advising Ukrainian armed forces. Now is a good time for me to backtrack and re-emphasize that Ukraine is the pointy end of this spear and owning the problem. They are deciding, but they are certainly supported by the international community without deploying forward to assume the responsibilities for that security. Just pause there because I want you to think about that because I'm gonna post something at the end that I want you to take away. Another key aspect that is noteworthy of mention are the NATO regional defense plans announced at the recent Vilnius summit. This certainly was not a surprise. NATO countries are poised along the Eastern Front with permanent forces. Debates can occur in the margins, whether that's reactive or provocative. I leave that to you and the academics. But the intent is to reassure allies that they can and will be supported should Russia conduct special operations into a NATO country. These regional plans and command and control alignments with NATO's and allies certainly has a direct impact on Canada and the Canadian Armed Forces. I'll leave it to the panel and our question period to discuss how Russia's invasion of Ukraine has accelerated Finland and Sweden's succession into NATO. but both those countries will be involved as forward presence battle groups move forward into brigades in the months and years to come. So I've glossed over the international aspect enough. I can use some Canadian examples as to what we're doing to support what I mentioned. Ukraine has demonstrated an impressive resolve over the last 560 or 70 odd days since the invasion started in 2022. There is no denying that Russia is feeling the effects of sustained combat operations as they try to regenerate their own forces. From our part, Canada remains committed to helping Ukraine defend itself against Russian aggression. Our support to Ukraine is long-standing and unwavering. We have been watching Ukraine's forces bravely and courageously push back against the Russian aggression. In that effort, Canada is providing what we can, often beyond perhaps our own resources. In accordance with NATO demands and discussions at UDCGs, there have been discussions between industry and governments to look at the ammunition production around the world and stockpiles, including precision munitions. One obviously lesson learned is this production capability that you start with during wartime is the one you're stuck with. It takes years to mobilize this capability, particularly when aspects of the government know you're supporting war, but the whole of society does not. You may have seen previous articles from Minister and other government officials and the Chief of Defence Staff trying to work with industry to work on speeding up that production of munitions for our own purposes and to send over to the war in Ukraine. Since the start of the Russian invasion, Canada has contributed over $1.8 billion in military assistance to Ukraine, 39 armored combat support vehicles, 8 Leopard tanks, armored recovery vehicles, surface-to-air missile systems, M777s, howitzers, and associated munitions, 200 armored vehicles, winter clothing and equipment, small arms, demining equipment, high-resolution cameras for drones, and satellite imagery. That's just Canada alone. Pundits are now criticizing Canada's support to Ukraine as, in some cases, the support to Ukraine is better than the support to our own Canadian Armed Forces. Most recently, Canada has extended Op Unifier, which is the training mission I mentioned, until March in 2026, thereby enabling the Canadian Armed Forces to respond to Ukraine's urgent capacity needs and capability building. I note that Operation Unifier is Canada's most visible assistance in the Ministry of Defence and the security forces of Ukraine. Throughout various iterations of Op Unifier, the CAF has provided the security force to Ukraine in specialized military training to support their professionalism and assist in aligning with NATO standards and those very principles. Since inception of Op Unifier, we've trained over 38,000 members of the security forces of Ukraine, either in Ukraine or in third countries. And those numbers do take us to current day. Canadian forces have also provided security forces of Ukraine with recruit training in LID in the UK, combat medical training, armor training, sapper training, technical training, and M777 howitzer, as well as leadership development. One that I'd like to emphasize and foot stomp here is through our Air Task Force in Prestwick. The Canadian Air Force has flown over 450 air missions, transporting over 12 million pounds of military donations from our allies. So we've cut aircraft into Prestwick so that the SAG-U headquarters, when they get donations from various countries, can use that as part of their assets to make sure they prioritize right place and right time. The third week of August, when I was in the SAG-U, the one-star UK general met with me, and she thanked Canada in particular and wanted to put emphasis on that capability because it provides them the flexibility to be able to push those donations forward into the war zone. Canada does play a significant and integral role in that headquarters. We do have a one-star Brigadier-General Mason Stalker that leads the training line of operations. He reports back through the Strategic Joint Staff as well as other levels of the Canadian Forces pretty much on a daily basis, or at least every second day. Also, at the request of the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, Canadian Forces has been bolstering Ukraine's cyber defense capabilities since early 2022. This support notably includes the provision of 24/7 cyber expertise and the use of cyber threat intelligence, most of these on reach-back capabilities. To sum this portion up, the support from Canada, from our allies and our international partners is critical to assist Ukraine in this very difficult and intense campaign. The ongoing Ukrainian counteroffensive continues to make tactical progress on the front lines in the region, looking and waiting for a breakthrough of the Russian layered defense. So let's look to the future. Despite its military setbacks, Russia remains a potent military force with the world's largest nuclear arsenal and the ability to strike its enemies at great range. Tactically, Russia is likely to conduct another partial mobilization in the next 3 to 6 months with the intent of amassing enough troops to launch a renewed offensive into Ukraine. However, it is very likely that any newly mobilized troops will be ill-equipped and poorly trained. Things like sanctions and restrictions are having an effect, and of course, the question was posed yesterday of how long can Russia actually sustain those type of operations. In its efforts to fracture Ukraine's civilian and military resilience, Russia will continue to target Ukrainian grain storage, port infrastructure facilities with drone and missile strikes to prevent the export of Ukrainian agricultural products. Over the coming winter, Russia is also likely to resume its strike campaign against the Ukrainian power grid and greatly affects the Ukrainian population directly, linking back to our conversation about human security and state security. Russia will also look to challenge Western allies in our collective commitment and resolve towards Ukraine. This is why the defense team and the rest of NATO allies must remain focused. At the July 2023 Vilnius summit, NATO leaders reaffirmed their unwavering solidarity with the government and people of Ukraine as they fight to defend their country and shared values. Through their joint declaration of support for Ukraine, the G7 countries also committed to providing Ukraine with bilateral, long-term security assurance. And Canada was the third country to launch negotiations for such arrangements on the 25th of August. These efforts will strengthen Ukraine's defensive capabilities, economic stability, and resilience, and will provide technical and financial support to Ukraine's immediate needs. I do not know what a ceasefire or the future of Ukraine is going to look like. Perhaps the borders are redrawn, renegotiated, or just remain where they are in dispute. However, I can see that the international community needs to be planning for that inevitability and most likely option as soon as possible. Ukrainian allies need to start planning for the future of what Ukraine looks like now. This means rebuilding institutions from a whole of society perspective, including economically, trade, resources, power generation, and certainly the future security. Does this mean a new Air Force? Air defense capabilities, certainly training and equipping enough fighting brigades to deter any future attacks. I'm talking about the difficult task of transitioning back from war to win the peace. Through the security assurances, Canada will pledge bilaterally with Ukraine to do its part. Given political and economic pressures, what's that going to look like? I'm sitting on part of those teams to have these discussions, and I pose these questions. It looks good that we're going to come out by Christmas with a pledge of what we're going to do. What does that really mean in terms of dollars, hardware, support, planning, effort, etc.? That's not going to come out by Christmas, let me tell you. There will be a careful balance to send Ukraine the resources that it needs, while there will be domestic pressure at home to build our own economy, let alone rebuild our own Canadian Armed Forces. The CAF and the Canadian Army are growing to brigade size in Latvia. Vehicles, equipment, and ammunition donations will continue, as well as efforts described above. Perhaps Unifier will evolve from individual training, as it is right now as the main effort, to professionalization of the NCO Corps again, and professional military education. Now, before I step away from this podium, perhaps take some questions, I'm going to do what I've done for the entire time that I've known Ambassador Patterson. I'm going to take her advice, and I'm going to use this platform to offer a challenge to all the smart folks in this room. So I started off by talking about how we in the West have taken over security situations in the past. We stayed for decades, left creating that vacuum, and often the situation is worse, unimaginable than before we got there. Quite often, the host nation practically steps aside and allows this to happen as it benefits elites or the nation just based on the amount of aid that is coming in. But are we truly helping in a lasting way? If the character of war is unchanging, then maybe how we approach it should change. Although there are countless observations and lessons coming from this war, it is too early to tell the success. I believe there is a future model for building security assistance in the future, and this is based off a little bit of the SAGU. Although the two main ingredients here, number one is the host nation owning the fight. They own the fight, they're part of the solution, part of the problem, they're staying in the lead, they're the tip of that spear. The second part, and we see this in Ukraine from the president right through the population. The second is allies supporting, advising, and enabling by various means, but not projecting our ways and taking over the security situation. If you bring in a force to try and substitute for host nation forces, it's going to fail. The population is going to turn against the security force in place. So I'm going to take a little step and departure away here because I spend probably 60% of my time doing planning for Canada's support to Haiti, not to Ukraine. This model that we're talking about in SAGU is something that I believe that we can do in future environments and support Haiti. Picture, or any other nation that's failing. Picture if we took a security force, send in a battle group in to fight Haiti in gangs and guns. It is going to turn into an international nightmare. You are now taking over the security situation, which is actually a policing situation, and then we could end up with murder and all kinds of sexual exploitation, as has happened in the past, as well as disease. And it will look terrible on the forces that have gone in to actually help. And we're going to be worse off in the long run. So months ago, we actually proposed the SAGU model for Haiti. And we're in the process of trying to do that. In fact, when I was over in the SAGU the third week of August, I took the commander of the IDTF, the Interdepartmental Task Force for Haiti, and the chief planner for the RCMP, who are supporting the HMP. That's why I was there. I took them to show them that model so we can take those lessons, transpose it, and project it into other theaters. So why am I trying to bridge Ukraine to Haiti? It's not about Haiti. It's not about Ukraine. What I'm trying to project here today and provoke thought is, do we have the model right? Do we go and intervene and take over a security situation in a failing state and project our own ideas or values? Or do we take a step back and prop it up from behind and allow the host nation security forces and the host nation government and population to be the pointy end of that spear? I leave that for your thought. Hopefully somebody smart in the room will develop a model that actually works for the future security environment. More than happy to talk about it as you see fit, either in questions or on the margins. So I've already taken up enough time, talked about Haiti. I could talk about it for days. But I'm happy to expand, like I said, on the margins. Thank you for your attention. I hope some of the items have tweaked some thoughts in your mind. I look forward to taking questions, but probably more importantly, hearing your own insights.